So I'm thanks very much for the introduction. Pretty much a quick cap on what XTM is. It's a multi-tenancy cloud-based translation management system and a computer-aided translation tool. And we've done quite a lot of things in terms of crowdsourcing, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience and the experience in the language industry when it comes to cloud sourcing, or crowdsourcing, you might say. The other button. There we go. So, quick agenda. I'm going to be really quick because I know I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to skip through this really quickly. Just like yourself, I only had a very short period of time to put this together, so I do apologise for some of the stuff. So, ideally, we're going to look at the actual benefits and the history of crowdsourcing within translation. Then we're going to look at the actual challenges that people have faced and companies have faced when they're looking at crowdsourcing, particularly with language translation. And then the things to consider. So things that you should consider when you're looking at cloud sourcing, and of the XTM exchange is our solution to that. So introduction to XTM, as I mentioned, the engine itself is a CAT translation tool which converts content to XML. The workflow is a translation workflow, and the QA manager is a content quality management and TM tool. So this is XTM modules, and it's part of our overall solution, and we've implemented this in different ways for different people. So that's a very, very brief overview, because it's obviously not a product pitch. So crowdsourcing with translation, the actual Oxford Dictionary was crowdsourced. So when they put the Oxford Dictionary together, they sent a task out to multiple people all around the world to actually take this content back in and ask how it's used and what the context for it. So this is how the dictionary was originally built. So crowdsourcing was around long before the internet was really being used. So just an example that you can be using crowdsourcing and not even know it. Some of the ones you will know, in terms of translation, Facebook used crowdsourcing to localize all its content, having its users log on and make that content available in different languages. And you might even say Wikipedia is crowdsourcing. You have lots of different users from different backgrounds adding content, this is how they've done it via the web. So for us, the benefits of crowdsourcing is when you have a pool of resources and you submit your request, that's instantly available. The prices are driven lower because obviously you have a pool of people that can bargain against each other. And you have no lock-in. So what normally happens with particular types of associations and agencies and vendors is they'll try to lock you into using a certain tool or technology, but when you're using a crowdsourcing approach, it means that you don't tie yourself down to that particular technology or tool. Also, it's very flexible because you can add more people to your crowd or take people away from your crowd, depending on your experience with them. And also the scalability. So you can roll your crowdsourcing out in a very small way or across all departments, across the whole company, depending on how you're set up. And obviously when you are crowdsourcing, it means you can collaborate. Because if you have multiple people and you're sharing it online, it means that they have the ability to share those ideas and resources with each other. So the challenges, from a language perspective, it's been on technology. So you have multiple people using different technologies, and the formats that they need it in, and various other challenges like this were issues for them. So that's something that have to be very clear when you're outlining how you ask for certain things when you're actually crowdsourcing. Also your perspective, not just your perspective, but from the people you're actually asking things of. So will they understand exactly what you want? Asking them questions, it's important that you ask them questions in such a way that they're able to understand it. The workflow, sometimes you might have a very flexible workflow in place, which is good. Other times you may have a very stringent workflow in place. So you need to identify how you want to manage this after you've crowdsourced. So it's not just a simple process of, here it is, go and do it, thank you very much, end of. What are you going to do with the results afterwards? How are you going to manage that? How are you going to monitor it? And then also the selection. So be very clear when you are crowdsourcing of what you want to actually source and who you want to source it from. There's no point going out very wide, because if you do that, you're going to get massive amounts of results and you won't be able to manage them properly. So the considerations for us, what we think is the right way to do it is to actually think about standardizing your technology and standardizing the things you ask for. Also, to standardize your internal technology, so how you're going to take that information afterwards and how you're going to process it. And another consideration is make sure your company perspective is set out before you start your crowdsourcing projects. Make sure that you understand what the people that you're going to ask of in terms of maybe translation, maybe software, maybe try to understand exactly what they're going to need from you, try to understand the right questions to ask them, and build a good portfolio. In terms of quality, also, when you're crowdsourcing, something to consider is how much effort and how much quality is important to you. Sometimes in translation, for instance, if it's for internal use only, then quality is not important. So crowdsourcing is perfect for this. Where in other cases where it might be legal content that you might be working with, it's very important. So from a translation perspective, you need to identify the quality that you want from this project as well. So be clear in terms of quality. Also cost, because when you are crowdsourcing, the tendency will be to go with the cheapest. However, it's important that you are not basing your decision solely on cost, because that will lead to repercussions all the way down your chain. And also the turnaround. Some projects when you're crowdsourcing, you can't expect instant results. Of course, you can get sometimes if you've got the right workflow and planning in place. But when you do crowdsource, you need to be aware that this takes some time as well, because you have to monitor that feedback. So that's important as well. For us, the things that we looked at were the translation stages, what you're going to do with translation assets. So what happens afterwards when you're crowdsourcing? So in terms of translation memory, in terms of terminology, in terms of all this side of things, what are you going to do? How are you going to manage it? In terms of control, is this going to be down to the person that you've allocated the project to? So if this was resources in terms of software, are they going to have all the resources locally? How are you going to manage them? So that's something that's important. Also for adding and adapting the workflow in terms of the actual translation, being able to add new resources to it as well. And then also recording the results. So if you are crowdsourcing and you get a bad experience with a particular agency or a particular vendor, then you should be able to record that information and pass it around the group so that no one uses that person again, or alternatively, you have a really good experience, you need to be able to share that across the group with people. So the selection criteria, this is something that needs to be done prior to any crowdsourcing project. You can't expect to throw something out there and get a immediate response and have a hallelujah moment and all your answers kind of given to you in one go, because that won't happen. You'll get multiple users with multiple backgrounds, and they won't all give you the same answers. So you need to be able to monitor and control this. So be clear about how you select the people that you want. Also, the apples and pears scenario, which is don't compare apples with pears. If you have one particular vendor or one particular type of supplier, if you look at them and you base it on cost, as I mentioned, you're going to obviously get wrong results. So you need to make sure that you have the ability or a standardized way of comparing the two resources with each other so you can select the right one. Also the time critical issues. So sometimes the ability to get all the information and monitorize it and then make an action really quickly is difficult. So you need someone to be able to sit here and kind of track this information after it's done. And then standardize the ratings, because you don't want to have to keep going back over the same old ground and spending lots of time. So you need to build yourself a matrix internally of how you select particular resources and particular linguists and things like this on for the language side. But it would be similar for software developers, for various other types of marketing agencies or various types of suppliers that you're looking to crowdsource. And this is XCM Exchange. which is something I'm more happy to show anyone who wants to see it, which is our marketplace or crowdsourcing technology. But obviously, it's something we can talk about. So, in general, the summary, we think that crowdsourcing is really cost-effective, evidently very scalable if done properly, and low maintenance, and it allows you to be more flexible and collaborative in terms of how you source languages or source particular types of services. And that's the end of...
Thank you very much. Tell me roughly, do you know how many people you've got on your database, total?
Within Exchange, I think we have about 7,000 or 8,000 linguists on the database, and all the information is there. The technology is standardized, so you can pretty much upload the document for or the Java file or whatever it is, and they can log on and submit requests or submit responses to it.
Excellent.
Which is quite useful, and the ability then to check their qualifications is there as well, because obviously that's not comparing apples with pears. That's
okay. Well, there's time for questions later. Thank you very much indeed, Dominic. Now I'd like to invite Nicolas Dittberner to the stage. Nicolas is going to give us a different view of the same crowdsourcing concept, a very interesting business model. Nicolas is the country manager for DACH at eLance.
That's right. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you also, Dominic. I'd like to take the opportunity to educate you about a niche topic around cloud, that is the cloud around talent. We are today facing a war among talent, so being a provider that has a network, a regional network of basically sourcing talent, for example in the IT space, initially is limited to people that are willing to move or that are already basically in the existing network. And I'd like to present you another opportunity to basically build an organization, to use the words of Mr. Hack from Jiu-Jitsu, who also introduced this or covered this topic a little bit. It's the opportunity to use talent as a service that integrates with your existing environment and technology. So let's see what I'm about to cover. I'd like to introduce the topic of online work in general, then quickly cover what our service is providing around this topic, and then let you know about one or two case studies that we are seeing on our platform. We'll probably not cover getting started and how to succeed because we are limited in time, and then we will have a short discussion around this topic. So, as already introduced, we are facing a situation globally that work not necessarily is limited to a physical office, meaning that collaborating in a project or for a product basically is done using a lot of technology to collaborate. For example, Google has spread their development teams across multiple offices worldwide, where teams of developers are working on certain modules, are working on certain products, and they integrate with certain processes that take care that actually the product development is rolled out in a proper manner, which gives me basically the opportunity to increase my level of input, increase my level of cultural context, and also creativity. This is initially what we are suggesting on our platform, that when being an organization of any size, whether you are a single entrepreneur, a startup that is funded, or a big corporation, you should basically reconsider how you typically build your teams, your organization, and how you roll out the whole approach. Since there's a lot of opportunities out there that will help you to gain and leverage certain trends that we see also in basically all sorts of markets, for example, the agency market and freelancing market, and any similar kind. So I'm trying to stress here that I'm not talking about the topic of outsourcing, which is known to anyone. I'm rather talking about how are you able to integrate basically external teams to each other, or add resources that you cannot get hold of in a short, timely manner using online work platforms or other technologies to help you to do so. The market that basically I'm trying to tackle in Germany is around consulting and online work, which has been basically announced from Bitkom to be a 36 billion market volume only in 2013, while actually almost 36% of all basically HR professionals are willing to add freelance resources to basically complete their teams, since you get a lot of skills out there or even professionals that are not willing to work for one single employer, or that are specializing in a way that it just doesn't make sense to work for one single employer. For example, in certain IT topics or also creative topics like around art for the movie or online gaming space. So those kind of skills, they would basically offer their special skills to the market and work on a project level rather than on a long-term level for one single employer. And this is again what can be covered with a technical product by adding transparency to this, by making those offers basically comparable, since they would, using us, they would, for example, offer their previous portfolios. They would also, of course, see a lot of ratings of the previous employers, so that they can actually see what this kind of freelancer or resource has completed in the past and achieved in the past, and if he got a good rating. So basically this kind of offering is set to improve how to source and how to access resources that you cannot get hold of with your existing resourcing channels in your HR department. What is eLance itself, the company that I'm representing, is basically, it's a talent as a service platform. Call it a marketplace for online work that basically lists both sides of the market. On the one side, the clients, for example, agencies, corporations, startups that are basically willing to add any kind of resources in the IT, creative, or even language space, so that they can complete their projects. On the other side, we have a network of 2.8 million freelancers registered on our platform that then send proposals that are listed on our platform, so that basically there's going to be a collaboration either triggered from the side of the freelancer based on a proposal, or triggered by the project manager that invites certain suitable freelancers to his project, since either he has been working with them beforehand and was happy with them, or because they happen to list a relevant portfolio. These are clients that are working with us, as you can see, of all sizes. For the bigger ones, it's mostly not about sourcing new talent every day. It's rather about managing the existing talent. So topics like project management, topics like payment on a regular basis. So those kind of pains are we taking away with our product. For the smaller companies like Wuga or Vivino, it's more about accessing talent. It's more about how to find, where to find, getting access to it, and then increase the team also on a demand level. So for them, for example, if they progress from a purely online also to a mobile offer, they would need to find a resource in the mobile development space, and then are going to be limited with their level of funding, so eventually are not able to source those kind of resources locally on the local labor market, since they might be too expensive for their funding. That's why they would look into those kind of online work platforms to find resources there that fit in the current level of funding of the organization. As you can see from the split, that the talent or freelancers on our platform are significantly educated. So you will realize when working with them that this is basically reflecting what we see on local labor markets as well, which is not a big surprise, since it's for those people who decide to go for a freelance career, it doesn't really mean that they are not educated by a university or anything. It's rather a decision that they have made based on a specialization or a general state of mind. So if you ask yourself, how are we basically taking part in this whole concept, is we are taking a cut. It's basically a commission that we are deducting from the project sum, from the amount that is basically going to be paid. While we do take care of the matching, we also take care of basically the payment. So typically the money is going to be parked on a bank account that then will trigger the payment as soon as certain milestones are reached to the freelancer, or as soon as the project is basically covered, so that also there is a certain level of trust among partners that haven't been worked with each other before. I'd like to show you one or two stories that we are seeing on the platform. This is a story of a startup that was founded 2001 by a non-technical founder. So this guy had the problem, he had to find basically IT resources to build his product. What he built was a mobile navigation application for iOS essentially, and has basically become very successful with that early 2011, and was that successful in the Apple iPhone store that Apple actually decided to buy this startup so that they can add this service to the existing mapping or routing application. As long as you know, it hasn't been very successful from the start, Apple Maps. So what they did is basically they bought a couple of services from the outside that brought in innovative technologies so that their application would eventually see some more usage. This product has been entirely built using eLance, basically attracting talent there, building a team around the platform, and the first couple of developers are still working with this startup today. These are two developers that are based out of Berlin. They are working from a co-working space and have built their freelance career using eLance. So they were really junior when they started off, and then step by step evolved their projects and learned new technologies on the job, basically attracted a lot of international clients there, and were able to basically pick up new technologies very fast, and are today some of the most booked developers in the German-speaking market on our platform. So basically that's my short pitch to you guys. I'm happy to answer some questions in case there are any.
I hope there's going to be lots of questions. If you make yourself comfortable at a seat, and sure, we'll see if we can pull some questions out of the crowd here that we're crowdsourcing questions from. Do we have any questions? It's a novel way of doing business and a novel business model, and it's certainly going to be a complicated one to implement. Mr. Wainwright.
Thank you. Phil Wainwright. I'm curious from both of you to just get a short insight into how someone using your platform can manage quality. Because that to me seems to be a key issue, and in the example you just gave of someone who was not technical, who was using eLance to hire programmers to get work done, well, how do I know that the coding that comes back is actually sensible quality, or secure, or whatever? How do I quality control translation if I'm asking translation into Chinese and I don't know how to do Chinese? What's the mechanism?
Do you want me to start?
Nicolas, please start. Yes.
I tried to do. There's no micro, but it should be good enough. All right. So let's use an example where an eLance developer is going to be integrated in an existing team of developers. So there's got to be a certain process in place in terms of the quality assurance. And if the team decides to work with a new guy, then they would also typically test him maybe, then basically give the new developer a certain task at the beginning to test his skills, and also make him aware of, for example, the Scrum process that they're working with, or the quality assurance process that they're working with. And so what is very likely to be happening is that this new developer coming from eLance is going to be integrated in an existing framework. If we are talking about a single entrepreneur who doesn't have any technical skills, then he will need a technical resource that is able to manage that himself. So he will have, of course, a harder time finding this kind of resources, meaning that he will probably hire 3 to 5 very well-ranking guys, and then basically test all of them. and compare them, and then work with the one that proved to be the most qualitative one. That's how we see it happening mostly.
Just in response to the language side of things, one of the things I mentioned is about perspective. So you need to get an idea of what type of quality you want before you can measure it, and that's obviously important. But in terms of how our system works in terms of managing quality, there's two actual automated levels of quality. We have one in the workflow, where you actually can set steps up for correction, review, and analysis, things like this, so in terms of the translation workflow. The other is actually within the environment that the translator works in. They have the ability to do the formatting checks, spell checks, and terminology checks based on the company's terminology that has been built up by yourselves or by the translator that you've assigned for the project. And it throws warnings to the translator as they're working in the environment, so that they are asked why. Also, if you have the resources globally, then you have the ability to log on to the cloud and add comments to any translation, which then can be fed back to the translator and incremented into the process. So there is a feedback loop for language quality. Also, there is a quality control mechanism within the actual editor as well. So there's various different levels you can actually do that for.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? I'd like to add one myself. Having worked in developing software for many years, I'm always frightened about some new employee bringing some algorithm, some secrets from a previous employer. Isn't the situation almost socially irresponsible if we're crowdsourcing? We're encouraging people perhaps to moonlight from employers, borrow their ideas, be light-fingered with their intellectual property, maybe misdirect resources. How do you protect me, the person who's creating this, from those risks?
Do you want me to start? In our case, it works like that we have sort of covered that using a standard agreement, but we encourage clients to add their basically contractual framework on top of that. So what we do is we have a certain level of security here on the contract side by providing a standard agreement. But as I said, for example, in the online gaming space where we have clients like Woogar, they have very specific demands to their freelancers and very specific contract work or frameworks that have been built on a very, very complex level. And what they would do is they add those basically legal requirements to the agreement between the company and the freelancer.
Thank you.
In terms of the ability for a translator or someone in that aspect to maybe use assets that they've got locally, what we tend to do within the XM environment, the translation environment, is that you can define the ability for them to use local resources or not. So, for instance, you can allocate your resources to them to work in the cloud, but you can say that they're unable to allocate any local resources if you wish to do so. So you can do that. However, normally with translators, if they have the ability to add resources to it, then people most of the time let them do that. So it's, do you really want to stop them making it cheaper for you? Is the question I think you need to ask yourself if you're...
But there is a moral question.
Yes, there is.
Here we are in the cradle of European protectionism from unscrupulous employers, where they produce the working time directive and maternity leave, and you're getting around this. You're letting people's own greed make them work through the night, and then they sleep at their employers. Does this worry you at all?
This, I think, is also regarding how you're sourcing, how you're using crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to the cheapest supplier. A crowdsourcing project can be limited to region, could be limited to a qualification, could be limited to various different types of criteria. So you don't necessarily think crowdsourcing, as I said, is throwing something out there and expecting to get a magic result or an immediate cost reduction. You should be very clear about where you're crowdsourcing and how you're crowdsourcing in order to get the right results. You shouldn't just simply throw something out there like that, because that would be very irresponsible.
Yeah. And can I ask a final question from me? Are you aware, in your working experience, of there being any litigation, either against your own organisations or people who are crowdsourcing for you being fired from an employer who finds out and doesn't like what this is happening? Is this an infrequent or a frequent occurrence?
Just from my experience, I've never heard of that happening at all yet. Of course, there will be always a certain scenario where you've, sourced a project, but that can happen not from crowdsourcing, that can happen from bad vendor selection.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a crowdsourcing challenge, it's more of a selection process.
Yeah.
Have you got the right criteria before you've asked the question, in your minds? An example would be like a company that I used to work for maybe 5 years ago. I won't mention them, but they sourced a project and did a translation for a crane manufacturer. And the QA process wasn't exactly as it should be, and a comma was left out of the ballast of the crane.
Wow.
Which meant in high winds the crane fell over and actually killed someone. So that was simply an oversight. There wasn't the right QA process in place. Now, that wasn't the selection of the vendor, that was a QA process. Now, so when you select a vendor for translation or any type of vendor, you need to make sure you have the right quality steps in place. And that, for me, is the most important thing to mitigate any risk you have. You need to think about how you're going to manage it from end to end, not just simply throw it out to the crowd and get them to do the job for you.
Nicolas, those numbers that you put up for eLance, it's truly a huge business, so you must have some litigation, but can you give us a feel for if this is a problem in the background?
Well, from my point of view, since we are not directly competing with the labor market, at least not in Western European countries, but what we are actually doing is we are organizing the existing freelancer market that is there in place for many reasons. I'm not aware of such things so far, but I guess since it's so many transactions on a monthly level, that there are occasions, of course, where it might come out. But at the end, those kind of platforms, they are not the source of that. I think it's rather that those kind of platforms provide some security to both sides here. And also, at the end, the added layer of comparability among the resources also for both sides will take out some risk. So from my point of view, it's actually not a significant thing.
So, before we close, are there any more questions that you'd like to ask?
I just had a question, what is the weight of the comma if it makes the crane fall over?
Well, an example would be that if a comma was moved back a decimal place, that makes a big difference in terms of the weight that was on the crane. So those small type of QA checks, if you can automate them, brilliant. If you can't, you need to double check them. So, when you select a linguist or you select a series of linguists or a vendor, then, these things need to be pointed out that these things need to be done. So if you are crowdsourcing, you need to say, this is what I want you to do, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Otherwise, you end up saying, can you do A? And they say, well, we do A, B, and then you end up with not exactly what you wanted. So the criteria is really important when you're crowdsourcing.
One more question behind David, if we may.
I have a question about the eLance or similar platforms. In terms of disrupting of the job market, do you see it happening in case, for example, job migration? Does it is there any effect on that, noticeable effect that you're observing?
Well, technically, what we are able to do is basically provide, for example, Southern European professionals in the IT or online marketing space not having to move, since with those kind of platforms, they are able to source projects from their hometown or from basically their living room without having to move to driving hubs like London or Berlin. So that's an opportunity that this kind of platforms provide, yeah.
Right, well, shall we call it a day? Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was most interesting, and thank you for answering my difficult questions well.
Thanks.